Hey,
Hey,
hello, Katrina. Hello, everybody. We'll give everybody a minute or two to hop in. We've got a riveting conversation today. I don't know if there are going to be spreadsheets for people or if they're just our PowerPoint, but
can I first just say that I fell and I broke my fall with my face, and that's what this is. My husband doesn't beat me, I promise.
okay. So for the record, but I did see because I saw the ring camera or whatever you have that he was like the gentleman to
He was,
help you up as soon as it happened.
he was indeed, which was very candy in the ER when they were like, "Are you safe at home?"
Yeah, did they say like wink twice?
Yeah,
Well, there you go. It could be the market. The market could beat you
could be.
up to a little bit here.
Yeah.
Um, there you go. Well, welcome everybody. Today we are talking about how to another kind of in the series of how to run your business like a business. We're talking about two topics that I think in our minds they go together. So we're going to cover them together: communications and calendars. And even if they don't go together, they're two
Together today.
super important topics to cover. They both start with
Kind of
C.
like pineapples and pizza. You might think it goes together, you might not, but it does sometimes.
Indeed. All right. Well, how do I get on the right screen here so I can start going
Yep.
on? Hang on. Give me just a second.
You are on the correct page according to my screen.
Okay, great. So simple and effective ways to manage your communications and keep your calendar organized. We'll dig into this. If we haven't met, if you're watching this from somewhere across the U.S., my name is Seth Daly. This is my partner in crime, Katrina, and we live in Austin, Texas. We work in Austin. We have a market center, a real estate brokerage in Baltimore, Maryland. So we help folks in both of those areas. And frankly, we love helping entrepreneurs. So some of the people on this call are going to be entrepreneurs. Some people are going to be real estate agents. It's all a blend, and we're glad that you're here. Katrina, anything you want to say from an introduction?
He lives in Austin. I live in Baltimore, so we really have kind of the whole country covered. We got you.
Yeah, and I guess when you think about it, that actually makes it so that we've got to be really, really purposeful with our time and with our communication. That's probably like the talk that we're going to share today really does come out of a lot of pain, a lot of ways that we have screwed this up over the years, but managing sort of a cross-country business relationship and like how do we communicate with the team that there's a lot of remote stuff, there's some in person, but how do we handle all that? It's going to be great. By the way, we always share this at the beginning and at the end. So a couple upcoming workshops. So one, we've been talking a lot about AI, and apparently people really like these conversations. We get a lot of folks on there. So we're going to be talking about AI again. So June 13th, mark your calendars. And then June 27th, towards the end of the month, we're going to be digging deep on working with VAs. So if you want to work with a virtual assistant, we're going to be walking you through. We've had VAs for how long? I mean, over a decade now, right?
Yeah. Oh, I think 12 years.
We have screwed up many of the things. We have learned lots of lessons, and we will cover all of those. So, all right, hey, let us know in the chat. Where are you joining it from? Where are you watching this from? And then I also want to know just sort of what are some of the questions that you have? Like if we're having a conversation about communication patterns and sort of how we manage our schedule and our calendars. Want to know what questions you would have on that. We will see if we can cover them. We'd love to do that. Jacksonville, Florida, the first answer in the house. So welcome. Welcome from Jacksonville. Yeah, we want to know what you would love to be covering here and what you'd love to learn about those two topics, right? Like how to manage your calendar and how to manage communication, maybe with your team, maybe with clients, et cetera. So we'll dig into it, right? So we think there's two things. We think these are actually like the unsexy but absolutely critical parts of managing any sort of business is communication, internal and external. We'll kind of differentiate that, and then organizing schedules, and we'll talk through just the lessons we've learned over the years. Welcome, Palm Springs. It's good to see you on here. All right, so number one, the perfect schedule. I mean, Katrina, walk us through like when we talk about scheduling, we certainly break it out, right? And they can see a little bit on here, but how do you think through whenever somebody comes into your office and says, my schedule's a mess, coach me on how to manage my schedule? What do you start with?
Yeah. So in some ways, when it's specifically about, it can be anyone. This kind of is a little bit more communication with team, but since you asked that question, I want to see what does your calendar look like, and when do you have the important things scheduled, and when do you have time blocks to allow for the urgent? And And honestly, there's a lot of times that we feel like our schedule's out of control simply because we allow everything to be urgent. And we don't ever actually get to the important. So that's where having the conversation, even if you're only having a daily huddle with yourself,
Yep.
Seth and I have a daily huddle every day. We get on the phone and we talk about what does today look like? What did yesterday look like? What do we need to debrief on? What do we need to work on? All of those pieces. But that can be a conversation with yourself of here's my schedule for the day, not you and all your personalities, right, Seth?
Right,
Uh,
right.
here's what I have for the day. Here's what's going on. Here's the things that didn't get done yesterday. Organize your day so that you're going into it with a plan of action. You know what's on the horizon. But kind of going down that list, daily, weekly, quarterly, annual. We'll talk about all of those, but I really feel like it's the opposite direction of important to urgent. So daily is usually what's happening that's urgent. Hey, this just went under contract. This person called. This fire needs to be put out. A lot of the daily conversations are what's urgent. The annual all the way down, and as you get closer to annual, that's what's really, really important. How do we make sure that we are setting aside our time to purposely talk about the really important things that's going to drive the business forward, even though it's not what's on fire?
Yeah. So I want you to think about if you have a small team right now, right? You've got people that report to you. You're a part of a team. You might say we're killing it all of these, right? And you might say here's where we're weak. Here's where there's some opportunity to grow. Maybe hey, we talk every day, and it feels like our business like we're always putting out fires. But when's the last time that we had sort of a quarterly review of how we're doing, where there's a little bit of hey, we just climbed a really big hill in the last quarter. Like when's the celebrations happen? Or when is sort of an annual recalibration of the business? Or how am I doing as an employer? How am I doing as a boss? Right. So think of these as they're all rhythms that if we don't have them inside of our business, then something starts to break down in how we're collaborating with our team. By the way, you could look at this same thing and apply this to your personal relationships, right? You could apply this in your marriage. What do your daily rituals look like? Your weekly rituals, quarterly and annual inside of any relationship, it matters. But the business relationship will fall apart if we don't have this.
And I think, have you ever heard somebody say, well, that was a meeting that could have been an email? Having this rhythm is how you avoid that, because if it's something, it's pretty rare that something can't wait 24 hours. So it goes on the daily huddle list. Or if it's a deeper conversation, a weekly list. If it's a let's add this to our business plan, it goes on the quarterly or the annual list. But you can avoid a lot of meetings by having very strategic scheduled ones.
Yeah, that absolutely runs. I'm writing down a note of something that isn't in the slides, and I want to make sure people get it. So I'll share it here in just a minute. So first off, if you have never used Calendarpedia, this is like one of my favorite websites for calendars. This sounds totally dorky, but we use this all the time when we are trying to get any sort of time blocking done. So let's say right now you're like, I want to just sort of recalibrate everything in my life. When Alice and I, so Katrina, my partner in business, Alice, my partner in life, and then the three of us are like total trouble together. But when Alice and I when we feel like life is just a mess and we want to recalibrate stuff, we will sometimes we will go here. We will print out a blank daily calendar. We will print out a blank weekly calendar, a blank quarterly calendar, so where I can kind of see the quarters at a glance, and a blank annual calendar. And then we might take a category of life, and maybe that category is financial. And then we say, okay, what are the daily habits we want in financial, right? Maybe you have a daily habit of every morning check balances in an account, right? So that would go on the daily page. Maybe there's a weekly habit. We have a monthly habit of reviewing our statements every month and sort of closing the books in our personal life, just like we would in a business, right? That's a monthly habit that we put on the monthly page down to annual. And so when we find that something is out of sorts, we can actually usually go to a calendar and say, our goals are somehow not reflected on this calendar right now. Mm-hmm. And again, this is true in business. This is absolutely true in life. So if you have nothing else that you're using this for, go to Calendarpedia and start to print out a daily, weekly, monthly, yearly calendar so that you can time block it, so that you can not put what thing you have to do tomorrow on there. Although I'm sure there's printouts for that. I'm telling you, get a blank one so you can print out what is your ideal life look like. What do you want a life by design and a business life by design to be?
And if you use different colors, that makes it really easy. If you're glancing at it at a year and you're like, if blue is my family vacations and I've got one in June and then I don't have anything else for the rest of the year, might be thinking, hey, I need to take the kids somewhere this fall on their fall break because we need that family time to connect. Also helps you really see where the gaps are.
Yeah, yeah. So let's start talking about it at the level of the day, right? I mean, a win the day is a super critical idea in any sort of salesperson's life. If you win the day, you will win the week. If you win the week, you'll win the month, so on and so forth. So we talk about a daily huddle. And when life gets crazy, I mean, you remember COVID, right? Start of COVID, the very first thing that we were like, we can't control much of anything that's going on right now. So what do? We're like, we got to make sure we're having our daily huddle. Right. It was just our way of recalibrating. Sometimes they were 10 minutes. Sometimes it was chaos and it felt like half the day went on, right? Because of just what was happening in the world. So when you think about a daily huddle, Katrina, when you bet at your best leading a team in Baltimore or leading our virtual team, what goes into that for you?
Yeah, I mean, it's at the same time every day. Everybody's included. There's times that we've done it via Zoom. There's times via phone. There's softwares that you can use that actually will call everyone at the same time so that people don't even have to remember. They just have to pick up the phone when that rings. That's super helpful. If everyone's at their desk, having it face-to-face in the office or on Zoom is helpful as well. But then having that idea of a stand-up, people don't want to stand up for that long. It's really meant to be truncated. And what's the theme for the day? If all you're talking about is, here's what's on my mind, again, it's always going to be the most urgent fires. There could be important things that you don't discuss. So when it came to with the team, with these, it would be a active listings on a Monday because we just had a weekend. What happened with open houses, or do we have any offers? Coming soon listings, things buyers under contract, active buyers, all of those. It's a theme for each day, speaking with those people. And might be on Friday is the Flex Friday. What's most important for us to talk about? Same thing goes with leading the market center, leading our brokerage. There's a theme in each day so that we're sure that we're covering each week all of the important things that we really need to cover that aren't covered in that weekly meeting.
Yeah. So whatever your business is in, just imagine you got 5 days. Start to categorize, like find 5 priorities for your business, right? In my personal life, I make it Financial Fridays, right? That's just great. So there's a topic every Friday. I think through finances for a few minutes in kind of my personal huddle, right? Have a theme each day, same time each day, stand up. I think the reason we say stand up is it'll make it shorter. Right. I mean, it increases the energy. It makes it go faster. These can be very small. Now, by the way, we're talking right now about a type of communication that is synchronous, right? If you have a daily huddle, that is a synchronized meeting. We all get on Zoom at 9:00 or 8:27 or whatever it might be. There's another way that you could use this. Again, we're blending a conversation about calendars and communication right now. You could use a channel inside of Slack, for example, and it could be called Big Rocks. We've done this from time to time, right? Where we're like, listen, we're in a season where we're not going to meet every day. We're not going to hop on Zoom, but what we do want is by 8:30 or 9 a.m., everybody puts their big rocks in the Big Rock channel. And it's basically what's the most important thing that you're working on today. It's the same concept, but it's what we would call asynchronous because everybody doesn't have to actually do it at the exact same point. They do it when it's convenient for them. You just sort of put a deadline in there. And then from there, you see what people are working on. But all of this falls under the umbrella of if your team is not at maximum efficiency and you're looking for ways to what are some tools in my toolbox as a leader to improve the efficiency of the team and of myself, these are some of the tools that you'd start to think about.
Indeed.
All right. How do I move on here? Katrina, sometimes when I get, all right, weekly. So a few of the things that we've used over the years for weekly rhythms that have been the best for us. One of them comes from a book called Traction by Gino Wickman. We'll talk about that. Another one comes from the brokerage, Keller Williams, that we're at. It's called the 411. So Katrina, walk us through any of this. I think I've got, here, I'll jump to the L10 page here in a second. And then I guess a third tool we would just say is a pipeline review. This could be true in nearly any business that somebody is in. If on a weekly basis, you are not reviewing the whole pipeline of what the sales process looks like in your business, we have found that this needs to be reviewed at least weekly for us. So Katrina, walk us through kind of the L10 meeting or level 10.
Yeah. So this is the structure that we're using with our businesses. We've got, how many L10s do you have on your schedule right now, Seth?
Right now, 2. I actually feel like I need 3, and that's a good example of me feeling that one part of the business is out of sorts because I don't have it.
Yeah. So we each have, I have an L10 that Seth's not on for a business that I'm really running, and he's kind of grandpa, just comes in and takes care of things. But we're actually probably in a season where he might be jumping on those as we're taking on some new ventures in that. So your L10 really, if you've got multiple different things that you're doing, you might need more than one.
Yeah.
For most of the people listening to this, you're only going to need one. So that really starts with what's the positive focus. Seth and I we actually also start with prayer. That's part of who we are as human beings. We start with prayer, but then there's the positive focus. What's going well in business? What's going well in life? Scorecard review. That's where you're really talking about where are we to goal? The goal is X and we are at T. This is how much further we have to go. It's numbers don't lie. And the temptation can be to not actually have those numbers prepared, so that because that can lie, if you will, of like, oh, those numbers aren't right. But having those numbers ready so that you can look at them and see, here's where we are. We're ahead of goal. We're behind goal. What do we need to do to get there? It's not about pointing the finger at somebody. It's about looking at this as a team and how do we make sure that we're hitting our goals for the company. That includes the quarterly goal review. So it's the scorecard of where are we today and how does that compare to the goal overall. Team headlines. This is where we talk about, hey, Seth is having a baby. Just kidding. He's not actually having a baby. But we talk about what's great going on with them personally, what's going on with them professionally. So-and-so is talking about they'd like to start their own business and we want to support them in that. How do we morph the world so that they can stay on the team and have some flexibility, those kinds of things. That's also where, frankly, if we think someone's at risk or we think we need to fire somebody, that's also where we might have those conversations in a confidential manner. 7-day actions, that's where we review from last week. Last week, during this during the L10, we're taking notes of what needs to be done in the next week. And it says, Seth, call this seller by Tuesday. Katrina, figure out the client event by Friday, and that's all on there. So we'll go through there. And to be straightforward, there's a lot of times we get to the 7-day action plan and we say, ooh, I forgot to do that. Let me do that right now. Or let me put it on my list for today, because the fact that it was on there, it's now a memory jogger. Again, this is helping to keep us on track. This isn't to make you feel guilty. And then the issues list. The issues list is the topics that we need to talk about. They're going to need to dive deeper on. In fact, a lot of times when we're in the team headlines or the goal section or the action section, we say, hey, let's drop this down. Let's drop this down. And that's because it's taking too long. We're talking about, hey, so-and-so is having a baby and they're going to be out for 6 weeks. What are we planning for coverage? That feels like a team headline at first, until we start talking about we need a temp, who do we need to hire, who can help us out. That becomes an issues list item. And when we get to the issues list, we rank them. What is the most important to talk about today to least important? Because if we don't get to everything, we want to make sure that we didn't just go in order of the list. We went in order of importance.
Yeah. Like there's always more issues than there are time to resolve them. There's always about living life by priority. Something that I wrote down earlier, Katrina, when you were talking about, is this a meeting that could have been an email? Emails are for information. Meetings are for decisions. And there's a lot of times that we've looked at our schedule. We're like, oh my gosh, this is death by meetings right now, right? We have too many meetings. And when we realize, like, all right, if meetings are for the sake of making a decision. Now, there might need to be some collaboration. There might need to be some crowdsourcing of information that each person has. But when we are at our best, decisions happen in meetings. So that might be a way for you, everybody to think about it. But that's where the issues list is really powerful. And the concept is, hey, you start to do this rhythm on a regular basis, and it creates traction inside of your business to get it sort of out of a rut and get it moving in the direction you want. I'll also point out that one of the areas for us that I feel a little weaker on right now when we do L10s is a quarterly goal review. Well, here's what that shows us. That shows us that there's opportunity for us to do a better job at the quarterly level of a review, right? And so sometimes we'll get to our calendar and be like, oh, sure enough, it wasn't scheduled in this last quarter. Right. Yeah. Or it was, and then something became urgent and it got over it. So again, you want to think through the rhythm that you have inside of your business, whether you are a solo agent, whether you're a solopreneur, whether you've got a small team, whatever it might be. what is the rhythm that you have on a daily basis? And now we're talking about a weekly basis. You could have an L10 with your spouse. You could have an L10 by yourself if you didn't have anybody. It's a protocol so you make sure that you don't miss important issues. And if you do, you catch yourself on a weekly basis rather than they drift for months.
And just really tactically, we make this a Google Sheet that each of these has a structure. That way, next week, we can just copy the tab, erase the things that need to be erased. But now those 7-day action plan items, the issues list items that were not a priority last week that are still on the list that maybe have risen in priority because of time, they're all on there and we don't have to retype everything.
Yeah, absolutely. So some other options, right? A weekly meeting. So the 411 conversation. I love this. I think I give credit to Gary Keller for this. 411 is basically, what are your personal goals? What are your professional goals? What's your goal this week? And then how do those roll up to your goals this month and this year? But I love what he says. If we're on track, right? You say, hey, here's my goal and I'm on track. Great. We talk about whatever you want. If you're not on track, we talk about whatever I want. And right now, the only thing I want to talk about is what do we need to do to get back on track? And that might sound a little cold. It sure works well for him. But I love that, right? Sometimes you get caught in these emotional conversations instead of evidential conversation. And it's really clear. Let's start by having an evidential conversation first. How are we doing? Look at the numbers, have accountability. And then from there, move to the emotional conversations or the qualitative aspects of them.
And 411 basically stands for 4 weeks, 1 month, 1 year. So just to make it really, really simple, if you want to close 48 transactions in the year, that's going to end up being 4 a month, 1 a week. So the goal might be close 1 transaction. So might sit down with Seth and I say, hey, your goal this week was to close 1 transaction. How did it go? And he's going to say,
it didn't go. It didn't close 1 this week.
Okay. So based upon that, what's your goal for this week?
2.
Okay. All right, moving on. Now, obviously, a closing is something you can't really control for this week, but it might be you wanted to make 100 contacts this week. How did you do? I made 80. You then set that the conversation is not me as the leader saying, here's the goals I have for you. Right. It's us agreeing upon what the goals are kind of on an annual basis. And then how do you break that down to monthly and weekly? But the person who is actually responsible for the doing is the one who's setting the goal. That person, and again, there was no judgment there when he said he didn't get that. He's like, all right, so how do you feel about that? Based upon that, what are you going to do this week? It's a very evidential conversation. And on the 411, you really want to have in there, what's a personal goal? What's something that they want to do as a human being, not just what does the business need? Because so often we're so focused on let's drive forward as a business, but at the end of the day, the purpose of business is to fund the perfect life. And if their marriage is falling apart or they haven't been on vacation, all of that is going to affect business. We want personal affects business at a pretty high level, and we want to make sure that we're supporting our people personally as well.
Yeah. And then we have something on here called the cash talk. And there's probably a few different people we could attribute this to. We learned about it through a course inside of Keller Williams. Then I saw some stuff from Strategic Coach. I think maybe that's upstream even from that. But the phrase cash stands for 4 words: knowledge, attitude, skills, and habits. And what it is a series of questions that really cover those 4 things. And unfortunately, I don't have it off the top of my head, but here's where we found ourselves using this the most. We use this the most when we would bring on a new hire. Because over time, the conversation would really morph into the 411, and that would work perfectly. But at the very beginning of relating to a new hire, we would ask these questions about what are areas that you've grown in your knowledge this week, right? What are areas that you feel like you've grown in your attitude? What are skills that you've developed? What are habits that you've developed? And literally focusing on those 4 things really helps somebody see sort of how they were climbing and getting momentum, or showed us that maybe they weren't, right? So it was really telling. It's always really telling with a new team member how they respond to these questions.
And with that, the 411, that really is an evidential conversation. This is more of an emotional conversation.
Yeah.
So I actually just pulled up some of the questions, and some of those questions are: what's the most important thing you learned this week? What changes have taken place this week in terms of your knowledge? What do you believe you still need to know or learn about to succeed in this role? Especially as a new person, like they're really telling you what training they need this week. What changes have taken? Go ahead. Sorry.
No. I'm just saying these are super powerful questions.
Yeah. What changes have taken place this week in terms of your attitude? How are you feeling? What do you find you really enjoy doing and learning? What things give you the most energy and made you feel most fulfilled? What kinds of attitudes and beliefs do you believe are necessary for success in this job? You really want to know what's giving somebody energy and what's sucking it, because often somebody might be really, really good at something that sucks their energy. And because they're so good at it and we haven't asked, do they like it? We give them more of that to do. And them living their best life. And that's often why people burn out and leave, because not because they're not doing something they're bad at. Obviously that's going to make them burn out, but because they're doing something they're good at, that just doesn't give them energy. What changes have taken place this week in terms of your skills? What skills do you still believe you need to develop to succeed in your role? And what are you learning the habits of somebody who is a really high performer in this role?
Yeah, I love it. By the way, Katrina, I don't know if the version you're looking at is that our cognito form.
It is. It was a
okay. Maybe go ahead and throw it in the chat. Don't fill this out, or we will call you. And although some people
it was an entry from the forum. I'll see if I can.
Okay, all right. Don't worry about it. Maybe we'll post in the chat if we can find it easily. But again, guys, everything that we just talked about was in the structure of what do we think is a weekly habit to have in place, right? So those are weekly items. Either do an L10 meeting, or do a 411 or a cash check. Those would be three things that we've used over the years with different team members that we feel like have really helped create traction inside of our business. Quarterly. So quarterly and annual. Let's talk about that. You see there, the GPS, the phrase GPS stands for goals, priorities, and strategies. Goals, priorities, strategies. Think of that as just like, what's the 30,000 foot view all the way down to the 10,000 foot view. And I wrote, GPS recalibration and a GPS creation under quarterly and annual, because the reality is a GPS, this worksheet is one that, and again, credit Keller Williams for this. That's where we got it from. This is something that we work on creating annually. So this is an annual process to create it. And quarterly is when we really check in. We work on getting it realigned, recalibrated to make sure that we're on track. This is also where, if you go back to that L10 conversation about how are you doing on your quarterly big rocks? Where do you get those big rocks? You get those big rocks inside of this. And I'm not sure what you just, okay, maybe that was me. All right. Second, here's a book that I recommend everybody read, The 12-Week Year. I love what these guys bring to the world of sort of time management and considering stuff. They've got a really cool concept. They're like, hey, there's 12 months in a year, but what if you think about the year as a series of 12 weeks? And you can actually get done as much in 12 weeks as you used to get done in 12 months because you simply compress the time. There's a principle that says all work expands to fill the time allowed. We have proof of that every time we do one of these webinars, because Katrina and I force ourselves to come up with great content, but we do not give ourselves a whole lot of time to do it. And it's fascinatingly stressful for some of the people that work with us, right? All work expands to fill the time allowed. You can get a lot done in 12 weeks. So that's a great book if you want to think about your world at a quarterly level. That is probably the rhythm that I try to think about my world at the most, right? Because every quarter we can sort of reimagine what's possible. You don't have to feel like, man, 2024, it's a terrible year. I think I'm losing this one. It's like you got 4 quarters in this year. Even if you didn't feel like you won the last quarter, the next quarter is starting over in just about a month, for example.
Yeah, and sometimes we think about quarters, we think about football. If you lose 3 quarters, you could still win the fourth, but you're going to need a really different strategy in the fourth quarter than if you're winning the first 3. But then there's also something really powerful about, hey, I won this quarter. Let's celebrate the wins when we can get them, especially in a challenging market.
Yeah. And then there's a comment at the bottom there, family goals first. If you're watching this, I think you're watching this because you're an entrepreneur or you're in the entrepreneurial space and you want a business that you're proud of. And I think the reason you want a business that you're proud of is probably the same reason that we do, which is because we've got a family that we really care about. There's people that we care about, and those lives worth living, right? That family comes first. And so when you think about your schedule, the very first thing I would tell you, put in your schedule is what are your goals that are personal in nature. So family goals, personal goals, whatever it is, get those on your calendar first and allow work to fill in around that. so that you're living a life of no regrets.
And
Katrina,
sometimes
I know you're a planner when it comes to this stuff.
yeah, I drive Seth nuts because I'm like, I'm going to go. So 2025, I'm going to be gone the second week in July. And he's like, I don't even know where I'm going to be this July.
For sure,
but that piece of, so goals, personal goals can take a lot of different, family and personal goals can take a lot of different forms. It might be around travel. It might be around experiences. It might be around getting out of debt as a family. It might be around buying that next house, buying that next investment property, making sure that you and your spouse are aligned when it comes to different pieces. But really sitting down and making sure that, because at the end of the day, if what you want is to buy a rental property next year and you need 60 extra grand for that down payment, that's going to impact your business goals for sure.
Yeah. And it's interesting, Katrina, most of our audience are in the real estate space. So on one hand, we got a bunch of realtors that talk to buyers and sellers every day. Now, if you're watching this, you're like, yeah, I know all this. I do this in my business. Can I just encourage you? Are you teaching stuff like this to your clients? One of the most powerful pages we have when we work with a buyer or a seller is the page called the calendar, right? Where we actually help them map out their goals, right? I need to save this amount of money to buy a house. And we don't say, great, well, whenever you figure it out, call us. We actually get in a meeting with them or hop on a Zoom call. We're like, we are going to help you figure out how to set goals in a calendared way to help you achieve them. And then we want to be a part of that solution by helping you find this house or sell that house, or whatever it might be. And that's absolutely a conversation to have.
Indeed. Absolutely.
All right. Other stuff. I don't know why I thought there was words there. Maybe not. All right. So one more thing. So a lesson from Strategic Coach. We always try to give reference to give credit to anybody whenever we found a resource. One of my favorite ways to think about scheduling comes from Strategic Coach. Dan Sullivan is the founder of that. And they use these 3 words: free days, buffer days, focus days. So if you're writing something down in the slide, write down there's 3 types of days under their system: free days, buffer days, and focus days. And it might be hard to read this a little bit, but understand that a free day is a day that is completely off of work. Now, I'll be honest, it took me several years in this system before I stopped fighting it, right? Because I actually like, and we'll cover that in a minute, I actually like the idea of like working a couple hours in the morning and then taking a bit of time off. Like there's something we'll call perpetual that relates to that. But their focus in this is that every day really gets a specific style. There's free days that are completely off. There are focus days, and gosh, let me see if I can read this, are for the most important activities in your business, the ones that utilize your unique ability and make you money. And then there are buffer days, are for handling the administrative work that has to be done to keep your business running smoothly. And what I found is that when I start to live my life, instead of saying mornings are for lead generation and afternoons are for appointments, or mornings are for appointments and afternoons are for administration, when I separate things out into buffer days and focus days, there's less like switching back and forth in my brain, and I'm a lot more productive. So the way my current schedule works right now is that I have a couple days of the week that I have a lot of meetings. And then I have other days in the week that instead of having my schedule almost blocked hour by hour, I have bigger blocks, like a 4-hour block. If Katrina and I really want to do some deep planning, an hour doesn't work. We actually need to block out 4 hours. And sometimes that might mean driving off site, or it means getting to an offsite location, even if we're going to do Zoom. So it's thinking about your days differently: free days, focus days, and buffer days.
One of the things that I'd say about those, going back to personal goals, when it comes to your free days, if you are going on vacation, something that I have found has been super helpful is to get on the same page with my spouse about what type of a day it's going to be. And that if it's let's take, for example, my husband and I celebrated our 15-year wedding anniversary this April, and we just planned a trip to Banff, Canada. And we're really excited to go. And I know it's the last week of the month. And in our world, by the second business day, we have to close our books. And Heather on our staff does the lion's share of that work. However, there's going to need to be conversations on the first and second business day of the month while I am gone. So I prepped him when we planned that week. I said, hey, that's transmittal time. I'm probably going to need to block out 2 to 4 hours between those 2 days. And he said, okay, cool. Now, when we're on that trip and I say, all right, this morning I'm going to meet with Heather. before we go out and do whatever we're going to do. It's already expected, rather than us being on this trip and he's like, this is our 15-year anniversary trip and you're on Zoom. What's going on? Having that as a understanding that as an entrepreneur, you want to get to the space where you absolutely truly can be free. And if you're not going to be 100% free with your family, make sure that you're on the same page first.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. All right, a couple other things. So we're in sort of like the junk drawer of random advice we have when it comes to scheduling. Katrina, you use Calendly more than I do, but I loved your distinction of like, well, here's when I use it and here's when I don't. So when do you use Calendly or any app, right? This would be true of any app out there that creates a public facing calendar that people can add in and put an appointment on your calendar. When do you use this?
I use this calendar when people want to meet with me, not when I want to meet with them. That might sound a little harsh because I actually want to meet with everyone. But if somebody calls me and they say, hey, I get an email. This is more frequently. I heard you talk about your calendar situation, and I would love to hear how you're using Slack in your communication. Could I get 15 minutes of your time to like just pick your brain about it? The answer is yes. The challenge is my schedule is a little bit bananas. So then there's the back and forth about how Tuesday 2, that doesn't work. How about Thursday 4? It's back and forth. Instead, I can just send them a link to say, hey, this will show you the free space on my calendar. Schedule a 15-minute meeting. And then they can go on and find the time. But that's because that's my preference. What I'm not going to do is if I want to pick somebody's brain about something and they say, sure, when do you want to meet? I'm not going to say, well, use my Calendly link to schedule a convenient time for you. That in general, I want to go with whatever their preference is for how they schedule things because I'm on their time as opposed to somebody who's on my time, if that makes sense.
Yep. And again, it goes back to time blocking, right? For you to be able to program in Calendly correctly, you literally had to sit down and kind of figure out your ideal week and say, all right, 2 weeks from now, when do I want my schedule to be big blocks of time? And when do I want it to be small little micro appointments? And that's the block that you would open up for Calendly.
I use a lot for hiring. Instead of trying to go back and forth with 10 different candidates to schedule a screening call or try to get them on the phone, leave them a voicemail and then be available, say schedule a time. And honestly, recently did this through Indeed and the Calendly link didn't hyperlink. And I had a number of candidates reach back out and say, I can't schedule an appointment with you because it's not a link. But it was like www.calendly. Like just copy and paste. Those candidates resulted themselves out immediately from the process because they didn't know how to copy and paste a link into a browser.
Yeah, do not mess with Katrina, people. Do not do it. All right, next, using project-specific calendars. So this has been a tool that we found really helpful inside of our team when we have, Google Calendars, which is what our whole team runs on, does not allow you to like tag or create themes of calendars. So the workaround that we figured out, I'm trying to remember who we got this from, is we basically make a calendar that might be a theme of some sort. So this one is like, what is this one? The contracts?
Contract dates. Yeah.
Contract dates. Okay. We could have another one that is like buyer consults, settlements. We could have one if you're in our office, like the conference room reservations, etc. So the point is you treat that calendar like a person. You set them up as if they're a person in a way. And then you just invite somebody to it. So if I have a settlement or a contract date coming up this Friday, the appointment will be made inside of the contract date calendar. And then I will be added as another participant in it. It's a super simple way then. And when you want to look back in time of things, you can actually, it's almost like using it as if they were tags.
Sure. Like a filter.
Yep. There you go. All right. You heard us talk about this earlier, but finite versus perpetual, and then synchronous versus asynchronous communication. So first comment, finite versus perpetual. If you are here watching a conversation about scheduling, we find that there's two types of people in the world. Now, I give credit on this to Brian Buffetti in their system called the Heritage Profile. They've renamed it since then. But when Alice and I took this, it was some of the best marriage therapy that we ever had because we realized that I am perpetual and Alice, my wife, is finite. And what that means, and Katrina, you're finite, yes?
I'm finite, yep.
Okay, so perpetual means that my ideal vacation would be going to Montana for a month and working 2 hours every morning from a coffee shop and then going on hikes. I just think that would be the most amazing thing ever. that Alice would hate that if she had to do that. She would rather go for 1 week where she didn't have to touch her phone at all the entire time, and it was pure vacation. Okay, so she would rather have a shorter vacation that had no work interruptions, where I would rather have like, let's work half a day and we can spend twice as much time traveling or things like that. Very different energy patterns. All I would tell you is if you're watching this, 1, figure out what you are, and 2, figure out what your team is. Now, here's how that relates to this next comment: synchronous versus asynchronous communication. If I am a perpetual person and Friday night at 10 o'clock, I have a business idea because I'm thinking about business at all random hours, and I send that business idea by Slack to Katrina, and she is a finite person, she kind of hates it, right? And if she took my communication as a synchronous conversation, well, let's put it this way. If when I had the idea, I call her, Katrina, I got this great idea. We should talk about it. Seth, it's 10 o'clock at night on a Friday. I know. Perfect. Right? That would go terribly. So you've got to understand, if you are perpetual and you've got finite people in your world, it's the time to learn what asynchronous communication means. Katrina, you want to explain this? It's a big Scrabble word.
Yeah, it is a big Scrabble word. You probably get like a extra bonus for that one. No, this is where we had somebody work for us. She was absolutely fantastic. And she was so frustrated because she was getting emails all weekend long. And I don't remember where she worked before. I'm assuming it was the government, because you don't email people in the government on the weekends.
Right.
But she was getting emails and had this feeling like she needed to respond to them. Why can't people wait till Monday to send the emails? And this was the conversation with her of, if when it comes to communication, that is a asynchronous communication. That is not something that needs to be responded to immediately. There's a time frame in there. And the more urgent something is, the more the difference in the communication. But this is also where, unfortunately, in our world, so much of our world sees text messages as synchronous communication. Like, I send a text message and I expect a response immediately. Seth and I, we've been on this Zoom now with you for 41 minutes and 59 seconds, and we aren't text messaging people. So it's not the kind of communication, really, unless you're voice to voice with someone, you are in asynchronous communication, and there's different levels of that.
It's even worse now that you say that about texting. Do you have, I mean, I know you're an Android user, which that's what we bring up in our prayer meetings, but do you get bubbles? Do you have bubbles when somebody's
Oh.
Yeah, that's crazy on Apple, right? Like, I send somebody a text and it's like bubbles. They're writing you back right now. That's, for goodness sakes, this is asynchronous communication. We treat it as if we're on a phone call. But we digress. We'll move on.
Do you remember AOL's Messenger? I'm totally dating myself here.
You are dating yourself, barely. I don't know that I had enough money to have a computer back then, but go ahead.
That was, you would have an away message. I kind of wish that was the world that we lived in, where somebody texted you and it was an away message. I'm at dinner with my spouse, because we didn't have this that we were carrying around with us. We were unreachable at certain times. That was a beautiful thing.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, here we're gonna shift topics, right? From synchronous, asynchronous communication. We're going to shift into communication. Let's talk about 3 things. 1, how we relate to clients. 2, how we do internal communications with our team. And then 3, we'll talk about some kind of project management tips that we picked up over the years. So first off, and you'll find that a lot of these, we might've put it in, well, this is in the external bucket versus internal. And there's a lot of these things that are going to have overlap, but we'll talk about it. So first conversation is around external clients, and a few tips here. Take a note of these. These might be some memory joggers for you, and we'll just walk through them. Katrina, you want to talk about like how we stack stuff, call, email, text, when our team is reaching externally to a client?
Yeah. So it's it's pretty simple: call, email, and text. I call, whether or not I get an answer, I'm going to send an email. It's going to be, I like, do you see down there on point 4, per my voicemail, great to talk with you. I let, those pieces, I'm going to recap the conversation. And honestly, a lot of that is for me. It's because I am not going to remember everything that happened in the conversation. And the quicker that I can put it in writing, the quicker that can be memorialized, so I can get it out of my brain. And next time we have a conversation, I can just look back at the notes of there. And then text kind of brings their attention to it. Hey, just sent you an email about the home inspection. Called you, sent you an email about the home inspection. Let me know a good time to talk.
Yeah. So for us, what we realize is that we want our team to have a sense of urgency in handling tasks, right? So, hey, we need to get this home inspection scheduled. And then you check in a little bit later. Is the home inspection scheduled? Well, no, I emailed. Oh, okay. And they haven't responded yet, right? So this always falls in the vein of, if you are not getting responses from the people that you're trying to communicate with, then you've got to change something in your behavior of communication. So the first principle that we'll teach is, well, here's what we follow. Call first, right? Now this is if it's time sensitive. There might be a reason that you would email first. Certainly if it was 10 o'clock at night, it would be an email, right? But when it's business hours and you are actually trying to get a result as quickly as possible, we call first, then we send an email, and we send a text. So if our team member says, I reached out to the person, if they're brand new with our team, we will say, like, well, specifically how, right? And then over time, we just know they followed our protocol, which is, I called them, they didn't respond. I emailed them, they didn't respond. I texted them. If they've done all three of those things, now we give it a little bit of time, because we've tried everything we can to make proactive communication to somebody, right?
And even then, the next question is, okay, if you don't hear back from them, when will you try again? Because the ball's always in my court.
Yeah.
It's always in my court. I'm never waiting on someone else. I remember once asking a lender, has the appraisal been ordered? And they said, no. I said, all right, I'll check back in with you later. After like the third or the fourth time, they said, I'll let you know when. And I said, okay, I'll call you tomorrow. That simply because the ball is in my court. I don't want to risk that they're not going to remember and that they've missed it. We've all missed things.
Yeah. You'll see that we have a tendency to shift to email as quickly as we can in business communications. And we talk with a lot of agents, especially solo agents, who are like, what does it matter? It's easy for me to text people and everything else. I'm just telling you, this is a business that you're running. I hope that your communication shift to phone calls. We'll talk about that in a second, and email as quickly as possible. One reason why we shift to email is because it is much easier to add people to a communication thread, forward messages, BCC, etc. When do you CC? When do you BCC? Most of the time, we follow a practice of we will CC pertinent team members on communications so that we can chime in easily, right? Katrina, I don't know if you got any good examples of that, but it's just how many times we watch somebody just go one off, and we're like, if we had just been wrapped into the beginning, you still take the lead, just keep us wrapped in on a CC. That way, if at some point in time we need to step in, it doesn't feel like we came out of nowhere to do so. And it also allows a leader or a team member to just chime in with some very quick comments, right? Mm-hmm. That really help move it along.
It also helps show that there's care there. Seth and I are working on a new business venture right now, and he and I are we're tag teaming a lot of the things. So when we have the call and we're recapping with an email, we're copying the other one. That way the other one can tag in and say, hey, if you need anything, let me know. Yep. Or I'm happy to be working on this together. That way it's just clear that we're all on the same team here, even though one person might be taking point in the communication.
So good news in writing, bad news in person. This might be it's in the top 3, I think, inside of our organization. So when you see above where it says call, email, text, you're like, well, why do you guys always call? Well, it actually comes from this rule. Because we have a rule inside of our business whenever we can, is that we never hide behind electronic communication, right? Katrina and I have a commitment with each other that if we ever have something bad to tell each other, it will never be in an email. You never have to look at your email or text and wonder if I'm about to drop a bomb by email or text. We just have a commitment personally, and we have a commitment inside of our business that we will not hide. We will. Instead of the way most people do this is they flip it. They're like bad news in writing because they're cowards, and good news in person. And we're like, no, do the opposite. If you have bad news to tell a client, if something didn't go as planned, if a contract is blowing up, if you mess something up, call them, get voice to voice or face to face somehow to give that. And then we use email to summarize those phone calls, right? And there's some other tools that we'll use in that. But Katrina, any comments? I know this is big for you.
The other piece there is that our agreement is the minute emotion enters the conversation, it leaves writing and gets voice to voice or face to face as quickly as possible. Yep. We've all been in those situations where everything seems to be going fine, and then we get the keyboard warrior email from somebody that they like, we touched a nerve there. That's the moment. Instead of being like, what are they talking about? Let me make my own response. Yeah. It's pick up the phone and say, hey, I am so sorry. I think maybe something that I said landed differently than I intended it to. Can we talk through this? Because it's a lot easier to de-escalate when you're voice to voice, because you can hear the tone and hear the respect and care in someone's voice.
Yeah. Then when we use email, following up on perhaps a sensitive phone call, we use it to summarize phone calls, and we actually show the other team member what we did. So if Katrina is tasked with calling somebody and having this conversation, I will know when I see the follow-up email actually what happened, because here's how it'll go. The email will actually read, "Hey, Susie, I left you a message, but just wanted to wrap into an email about this." Or it might say, "Hey, Susie, I tried to call you. Can you call me back?" Or, "Hey, Susie, great talking with you. I appreciate you taking the time to talk about this with me." By doing that and by copying me on it, I don't actually have to ask her, "So did you reach her? Did you not reach her?" Like, it's actually clear just from me reading the email.
There's been from time to time, somebody new on our staff will say, "Why should I copy you on those things? That feels like micromanagement." And it's actually the opposite. It's so that we don't have to micromanage, especially for a new team member who may or may not understand all of our nuance of decision making, which we'll get into a little bit later. It makes it so we can simply just see the progress. We don't have to ask if you've copied us.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. All right. Well, we'll try to move through this a little bit faster here. So email is our preferred method of written communication. Again, we are trying to manage sort of what a client wants. Sometimes the client's like, "Oh, I just prefer text." That's true. And we're trying to run a business, and in a business world, email is absolutely preferred. So sometimes we will shift, like we will use what they want, which is text, but my text to a client might just read, "Hey, please see email. I just sent you something important." So it's using text the way they prefer, and it's pulling the conversation around to the medium that I think works best in a professional setting, which will be email. What you'll find is that if you start going back and forth, it's so much harder to scale. It's so much harder to wrap team members in, or if you want to step away on vacation, somebody can manage your email, but they don't have your cell phone with you, right? It's the more that you get your business to an email base, the more you are actually running it like a business.
And text is really the death blow to being able to scale. I will give you this tip for texting with millennials, because they often will say, I won't pick up the phone. I don't want to talk on the phone. So here's the tip. You send them a text, you say, "You got a minute?" They say yes. And then you call them, and it works every time.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Now, by the way, we are still totally guilty, right? There's going to be some people watching this and we interact with on a regular basis. They're like, "Seth, you're still texting me way too much." I'm like, "I know. It is totally easier. It is totally easier." There's going to be a comment in a minute when I mention the name Nick Sonnenberg that will relate to this. But just because it is easier does not mean it is better. So that just something to remember. Now, don't leave these out. Phone, video, in-person communications are the most powerful. It allows us to answer questions or concerns in real time. When you send somebody an email, even if it has, "I covered these 10 items," but they read item number 1 and they misconstrue it, and now it colors everything else that they read. If you want to be in control of communication, if you want to be responsible for how somebody interprets your words or reads into it, then the more that you can do it in real time, the better. So it allows us to answer questions, allows us to observe body language, and allows us to test for rapport and hear tone. By the way, it's one of the biggest struggles of what we are doing right this very second. Katrina and I made a calculated decision. We're doing this talk right now as a webinar style. What that means is we can see each other. It means we can't see you, right? It means we don't know who's paying attention or who's not. Think of that like in the communications with your clients. As much as you can get face-to-face, it has a huge impact.
And by the way, a little psychology, I heard this somewhere, not entirely sure if it's true, but it makes sense, is that when you see a video of somebody, the same synapses fire in your brain as when you're face-to-face with them. So that's what so sending a video message, being on Zoom is actually, we might equate Zoom to be a little bit more like phone, but it's actually more like face-to-face because I'm seeing your face. It's also a great way to send video messages.
Absolutely. And there's a few resources you could use there. BombBomb is one we've used in the past. I was on a hike yesterday with somebody who uses Loom exclusively for this. It has a ton of analytics of what people watch and how much. What's the one, what's the video messaging service, Katrina? Marco Polo. There's also just voice messaging. Like that's getting really popular. Again, that will give you tone, but it won't give you the visual side of it. But there's so many ways to be more powerful in our communication. Let's shift real quick to internal. So internally, we prefer Slack. So if external, we use email. Internal, the main method that we use is Slack. Now the struggle is a lot of our internal communication could be a client sends an email to us, and now we're trying to chat about it internally. Sometimes we will just pass that email back and forth, and that's like, oh my God, that's so complicated. Sometimes we'll screenshot it or we'll grab it once and we'll put it in a Slack channel so that the communication, it doesn't clog up our email inbox. It kind of exists inside of a Slack channel. If you've not used Slack, reach out to us. We're happy to give you our experience with it, but it's been a game changer for, I don't know, maybe 5+ years now.
Yeah. And by the way, when we switched to Slack, prior to that, we had been using Google Hangouts and text and Facebook Messenger and Homing Pigeon. We had like a whole hodgepodge.
Yeah.
And we made the decision at that time that in order to implement this properly, we were going to make a stand on it. So anytime something needed to be slacked, if it was a text message, we'd respond and say Slack. If it was an email, it should have been a Slack, say Slack, because we had a certain litmus test of what should be Slack, just so that people got into the habit. Because if you continue to do the same thing that you've done, now you've just added another communication platform on top of the other 5 that you already have, you'll drive your people crazy.
Yeah. By the way, so escalation, here's what this means. If something is not time sensitive, right, and this could be potentially with clients, right, email might be just fine, right, because it needs a response in 24 hours. If you need something faster, I'm giving you sort of the language we would say inside of our team. If you need something faster, Slack me, right? Send it on Slack. Well, Katrina, I sent you a Slack 45 minutes ago. Well, I was teaching a webinar, right? Or I was prepping for this, or I was time block. I was in do not disturb mode. If you need me faster than Slack, send me a text that says, see Slack or see email. We even have a code that it's like hot potato, right? That we got a team member that's like, if she really needs to reach us, she'll text both of us, or she'll say hot potato, right? And then if it's even more urgent than that, call. So the problem, like these are all 4 methods. You just need to identify inside of your team when they should use each one, right? If I had a team member that anytime they needed anything, even if it was not urgent, they called me, that's terrible. Because how can I triage and tell what's most urgent or not, right? So we get on the same page with our team about the way that you want to walk through this process. Anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, that piece about if you're that person who's like, I always pick up the phone, just consider that it makes it really difficult for somebody else to time block. You might be in your time block, but you are making it so they can't. So there's times that I will get a phone call and I'll say, I'm in a meeting. Can I help you? They say, just call me when you can. Oh my gosh. And often what ends up happening then is because of that, it's 2 hours later, I call them and I'm not even the one that needs to give them the answer. They need to talk to Seth. They could have talked to Seth 2 hours ago if they had sent an email, and I could have just forwarded it on.
Yeah. By the way, this is kind of a classic one. Sensitive issues, always voice to voice. We've talked about that. Here's a rule about Seth Daily. I never have a minute. I always have an hour. If I'm walking through the office or somebody calls, hey, you got a second? The reality is my schedule is pretty time blocked, and I try to be purposeful with it, which means I never have a minute. But when something is important to somebody, I always have an hour. And that's a principle that we try to hold true inside of our team. Is like we avoid the little got a minute disruptions, but we make sure people know, like, but if you need me, I don't have a minute, but I will have an hour for you, or as long as it takes.
It just might not be right at this minute. It might be 4 o'clock today.
Absolutely. Couple more comments on project management. 1, organize information for the speed of retrieval. So this comes from this book, Come Up for Air. This is it's kind of nerdy, and I love it because it's so nerdy. But Nick Sonnenberg wrote a great book, again, Come Up for Air. And here's his idea: organize information for the speed of retrieval. So this is an example. I'll give you 2 examples. 1, you want to get some information to a team member, and the fastest way for you to get it out of your brain to them is you text it to them. Great. Now you just organized information for speed of sending, for speed of transmission. But now it's like a day or 2 later, and they're like, wait a minute, I'm trying to find that message that Seth sent. I remember it was something about this home inspection. Did he Slack me? Did he text me? What was it, an email? And now they're trying to find it because you prioritize it for one mode instead of prioritizing it for how to retrieve it. So when we say, listen, all information will be in Slack, and it'll be kind of by channel, if we do that correctly, it's like, I remember what channel it's in, and based on that, I know how to get to the information. And then Katrina, I don't know if you want to comment on that, or also just Google Docs. Like, I know that's our strong preference over the years.
That is absolutely our strong preference. So let's move on to the next. We're running out of time here.
All right. More tips on project management. And this is our last one, just so you know.
So so the piece about closing the loop, that's where the emails are helpful. But I want to really go down to this decision-making ladder. This is by a podcast series. I think there's 5 or 6 of them from a company called Manager Tools. This was a really, really helpful framework for us in understanding how to get people to the point that they can make decisions independently. And what we found is that we would have people on our team that we would want to give them a project and they would want to like take it all the way to the end. And we're like, no. And what we realized is it's because a lot of times we didn't give them proper context of the delivery. We say, find a new photographer. What does that mean? What are we looking for in the photographer? What are the criteria for that? We actually had this happen. We said we need a new photographer. And a month later, we're looking at our pictures of a listing and they were terrible. And realized that we had given somebody a task instead of a deliverable. And we didn't say, go do research and bring us your analysis. They just went to implementation without understanding how we think and the criteria that we have. So it's a really, really great set of podcasts to listen to if you're leading people. And I have all new hires listen to this and I listen to it again. That way we're on the same page of, hey, this is where I need you to research this. That way I can see, how do you do research? How do you go about finding things? Do you Google and the first thing you find is what you go with? All right, let me teach you how to be a little bit more skeptical in your research there so that you think a little bit more like me. That way your analysis will be a little bit more like mine. Your recommendation will be like mine. And eventually you can get to the point where your implementation is independent because I know that you think like I think.
Yeah. I'll give you an example. This afternoon, Katrina is going to go look at some commercial space. Okay. And here's what's not going to happen. So I know she's doing it. And what's not going to happen is that she's going to call me later and be like, yep, signed a lease. Congratulations. Right. That's not going to happen. It's not going to go to the level of decision or implementation, but it's going to come to the level of recommendation, right? Which just shows you sort of the trust that we've built over the years. And Katrina knows that in that recommendation, it's kind of like math class. She's going to show her work. She's like, I recommend this, and here's why. I looked at these 3 options or these 6 options, and here's what I analyzed, and here's the research that even was the basis for the analysis that I did, and then based on that analysis, here's my recommendation. So if you have a new team member and you're frustrated, right? Because like I want them to do this, and I want them to do this much, and they should have checked in with me here. It's either that they're going too far or they're not going far enough. Use this language, right? Do you just want them to do a task or a deliverable? That's kind of the most basic thing. Do you want them to do it at the level of research? Do you want them to think through the research and actually give you some analysis? In which case you got to teach them how to think, or do you want them to actually come to you with recommendations? What we have found for training people is we tell them the level and then we tell them to try the next level. So I'll say, I want you to go do some research, but when you come back to me with the research, I want to kind of hear how you would analyze it. Right. So I'm like, they're firmly in one level. They're testing out the next level. Or, hey, when you come back to me with your recommendation, I want you to walk me through that whole process. Even though they know I'm still going to make the decision, I want to know what the recommendation is, because then if the recommendation matches my decision time and time and time again, then I know that it's time to level up and then go to the level of decision. So
like, I might not be signing a lease today. There are going to be a dozen other decisions that I make today that Seth's not involved in because we've gone through this and those processes.
Totally. Awesome, guys. Sorry, we're having a talk on calendars and look at our clock management. We're 5 minutes behind, but we appreciate you being on. Again, take a picture of this or go ahead and sign up. So here's the upcoming ones, right? AI tools to boost productivity and working with VAs. We'd love to see you at these. We hope you're finding value from these. We'll stay on here for a minute or two just to see if there's any questions that find their way in the chat. And Katrina, let me know if you see anything there. Otherwise, I think you guys know how to reach us. You've got Katrina's information here. You've got my information. If you want to schedule some time, there you go, SethDaily.com/discovery. You want to sign up for our newsletter, sign up for any of the upcoming webinars. We appreciate you being on, and we will talk to you soon. And hey, if there's a topic that you feel like, hey, I really want to know how Seth and Katrina would think about this, those are our favorite things. That's how all these come out of it. They come out of these series of questions that we get from agents and other business owners. And we're like, we know that you guys have been doing this for a while. We know that the way that you think about it is unique and structured. And we just want to bring that value to as many of our friends around the country as we can. So thank you for your time. Thanks for being on, and we will talk to you soon. Take care.